poor nurse danced at work, not knowing the Millionaire CEO was watching everything. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune in the pediatric oncology ward as Mercy Callahan stripped off her latex gloves for what felt like the 100th time that shift. Her feet screamed inside her second-hand sneakers, the ones with the hole near the left big toe that she'd covered with medical tape. Again. "Another double?" asked Janet, the charge nurse, not looking up from her charts. "Girl, you're gonna burn yourself out." Mercy forced a smile that didn't quite reach her brown eyes. Bills don't pay themselves. She didn't mention that her landlord had already called twice this week, or that she'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner for the past month. Some struggles were too heavy to share, even among friends. The ward had been especially brutal lately. 3 kids in active treatment, 2 families who couldn't afford to miss any more work, and a hospital administration that seemed more concerned with quarterly reports than patient care. The new efficiency protocols meant fewer staff, longer hours, and a growing list of things they simply couldn't afford to do anymore. Room 312 was where 8-year-old Isaiah Washington spent his days. The boy had been fighting leukemia for 6 months, and his grandmother, Miss Ruby, hadn't left his side except to work her overnight cleaning shift at the downtown office building. The family couldn't afford the hotel nearby, so Miss Ruby slept in the uncomfortable recliner chair, her weathered hands always holding on to Isaiah's small ones. "Miss Mercy." Isaiah's voice carried that particular brightness that sick children develop, a fierce joy that breaks hearts and mends them simultaneously. "Did you bring the music today?" She had. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the worry, the empty stomach, she had remembered. Because some promises are sacred, and the promise to bring a little music to a scared child's day was one of them. Mercy pulled out her phone and scrolled to their shared playlist, old Motown classics, some contemporary gospel, and a few upbeat pop songs that made Isaiah's eyes light up. The hospital's sound system had been temporarily shut off to conserve energy costs 3 months ago. The silence that followed had been deafening. "What do you say we get your body moving today?" Mercy asked, checking his foreline and noting his improved color. "Dr. Martinez said light activity would be good for you." Isaiah's grin could have powered the entire ward. "Can we do the one where you move your arms like this?" He demonstrated a move they'd been working on, a simple sway with gentle arm movements that wouldn't disturb his port or tire him too much. Miss Ruby looked up from her worn Bible, her face etched with the particular exhaustion that comes from watching your grandchild fight for his life while trying to hold a family together. "You don't have to, I want to," Mercy said simply. And she did. In this sterile world of beeping machines and clinical procedures, dancing with Isaiah was the most natural thing in the world. She turned on "My Girl" by the Temptations and began to move. Nothing elaborate, a gentle sway, arms moving in slow, fluid motions that Isaiah could follow from his bed. Soon he was giggling, his small hands moving to the beat, his body swaying as much as the tubes and wires would allow. "Look, Grandma Ruby," Isaiah called out. "Miss Mercy's teaching me the shoulder thing." Other staff members began to peek in. Maria, the housekeeping supervisor, paused in the doorway with her cart. Dr. Patel stopped mid-stride in the hallway. Even Janet, who'd been a charge nurse for 23 years and claimed she'd seen everything, found herself tapping her foot to the rhythm. "Oh, honey," Miss Ruby whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Look at my baby dance." What Mercy didn't know was that the 13th floor of the Whitmore Financial Building across the street had a perfect view into the pediatric ward. What she didn't know was that Ezra Whitmore, 34-year-old CEO of Whitmore Capital and recent subject of a Forbes article titled, "The Ruthless Rise of Wall Street's Youngest Shark," had been standing at his floor-to-ceiling windows for the past 10 minutes, transfixed. He'd been on a conference call with Hong Kong investors, half listening to projections and profit margins, when movement in the hospital caught his eye. At first, he'd thought it was his imagination. But there it was, a young woman in scrubs dancing with a child who was clearly a patient, their movements slow and deliberate, filled with a joy that seemed to radiate even through the glass and distance between them. Ezra had built his fortune on reading people, on understanding what motivated them, what they wanted, what they'd sacrifice to get it. But watching this scene, this woman dancing with a sick child while his grandmother wept with happiness, he couldn't parse the motivation. There was no audience to impress, no money to be made, no strategic advantage to be gained. It was just goodness. Sir? The voice of his assistant, Priya, crackled through the conference phone. The Hong Kong team is asking about your position on the healthcare sector investments. Ezra didn't answer immediately. He was watching the woman, the nurse, as she helped the child move his arms in time with music he couldn't hear but could somehow feel. Other hospital staff had gathered in the doorway, some filming on their phones, others simply watching with the kind of expressions Ezra hadn't seen in the cutthroat world of finance. Sir? Cancel the rest of my calls today, Ezra said quietly. But sir, the Yamamoto meeting, cancel them all. He ended the conference call and continued watching until the song ended and the nurse, he could see her name tag now through his high-powered binoculars, which he'd initially bought to spy on competitors' buildings. Mercy, her name was Mercy, helped the child settle back into his bed. Ezra Whitmore was not a man given to impulse. Every decision was calculated, every move strategic. He'd earned his reputation by being 3 steps ahead of everyone else, by seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles, by turning every human interaction into a transaction that benefited him. But something about what he'd just witnessed had cracked something open inside his chest, some long-buried part of himself that remembered what it felt like to believe in goodness without agenda. He picked up his phone and dialed his head of security. Marcus, I need you to find out everything you can about St. Catherine's Hospital. Specifically the pediatric oncology ward. Sir? And Marcus? Be discreet. This isn't a business acquisition. This is something else. The next day, Mercy arrived. At work to find chaos in the parking lot. News vans, photographers, and a crowd of people holding signs that read, "Save our hospital," and "Healthcare is a human right." Her stomach dropped. The rumors had been swirling for weeks. The hospital was struggling financially, pediatric services might be cut, staff would be laid off. Mercy. Dr. Martinez intercepted her at the employee entrance. Did you see the news? What happened? He thrust his phone toward her. The headline made her knees weak. St. Catherine's Pediatric Ward to close, budget cuts leave families scrambling. They announced it last night, he said, his usually steady voice shaking. 6 weeks. That's all the notice they're giving us. The kids, their families. He shook his head. Some of these children can't be transferred easily. The specialized care, the relationships they've built with staff, it's not just about medical treatment, it's about trust, continuity. Mercy thought of Isaiah, of Miss Ruby who'd finally begun to trust that this place was safe, that the people here truly cared about her grandson. She thought of all the other families who'd found a second home in their ward, who'd learned to navigate the impossible balance between hope and heartbreak with their support. What can we do? Fight, Dr. Martinez said simply. But we need help. We need someone with resources, with influence. He trailed off, both of them knowing that their combined social media followers and community connections weren't enough to save a hospital ward from corporate financial decisions. Mercy went through her shift in a daze. She danced with Isaiah as usual. He'd requested "Happy" by Pharrell Williams, and she didn't have the heart to tell him about the closing. Miss Ruby had noticed something was wrong, her sharp eyes missing nothing, but she didn't press. Miss Mercy, Isaiah said as she was getting ready to leave, are you sad today? Children always knew. No matter how hard adults tried to hide their pain, children could sense the shift in emotional weather like animals before a storm. A little, she admitted. But dancing with you always makes me feel better. Then we should dance every day. He said with the simple logic of childhood. That way you'll never stay sad for long. If only it were that simple. Mercy was walking to her car, her 15-year-old Honda with the cracked windshield and the passenger door that required 2 tries to open, when she noticed the man in the expensive suit standing near the hospital entrance. He looked out of place among the medical staff and worried families, his tailored clothing and confident posture marking him as someone from a different world entirely. "Excuse me," he said as she passed. "Are you Mercy Callahan?" She stopped, instantly on guard. In her experience, men in expensive suits asking for nurses by name usually meant trouble, lawyers looking for witnesses to malpractice cases, insurance investigators, or hospital administrators delivering bad news. "Who's asking?" "My name is Ezra Whitmore. I was wondering if we could talk." The name meant nothing to her, but his manner did. There was something different about him, a nervousness that seemed at odds with his polished appearance. Like he was trying to figure out how to say something that didn't have a script. "Look, if this is about a patient, it's not," he said quickly. "It's about..." This might sound strange, but it's about dancing. Mercy blinked. "Dancing? I saw you yesterday. With the little boy. From my office." He gestured toward the Whitmore Financial Building. "I know how that sounds, but I wasn't spying. I was on a call and I happened to look out the window, and I saw." He trailed off, seeming to struggle for words. For a man who clearly was accustomed to being articulate and in control, his uncertainty was almost endearing. "You saw what?" "Joy," he said simply. "In the middle of what must be one of the hardest places to work, you were creating joy. And everyone around you, the other staff, the grandmother, the child, they all felt it too. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen anything like that. Anything real." Mercy studied his face, looking for the angle, the manipulation, the hidden agenda. Men like him, and she could tell he was wealthy, powerful, probably used to getting whatever he wanted, didn't approach tired nurses in hospital parking lots to talk about joy without wanting something in return. "What do you want?" she asked bluntly. "I want to help," he said. "I heard about the ward closing. I want to help save it." "And what's that going to cost me?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Cost you? Men like you don't help people like me without expecting something in return. So what is it? You want me to make a commercial for your company? Pose for some photos about your charitable giving? Date you?" The last suggestion made him recoil slightly, and for the first time since the conversation began, Mercy believed his surprise was genuine. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "I want to give something to you. To the hospital. To the families who need this place." "Why?" "Because," he said, and she could see him struggling with the honesty of it, "watching you dance with that child yesterday reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That there are people in this world who do good things just because they're good. Not because they have to, not because someone's watching, not because there's a payoff. Just because it's right." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "I'd like to make a donation to the hospital. Specifically to ensure that the pediatric oncology ward stays open and fully funded. And I'd like to establish a program that supports the families financially while their children are receiving treatment." Mercy stared at the card. Whitmore Capital. She'd heard the name, vaguely. They were big in financial news, the kind of firm that managed billions of dollars and influenced stock markets. "How much money are we talking about?" "However much it takes," he said simply. "The ward stays open, the staff keeps their jobs, and no family goes into debt because their child is fighting for their life. And what do you get out of it?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking back toward the hospital building. "I get to know that somewhere in this city, there's a nurse named Mercy who dances with sick children and makes them believe that the world still has beautiful things in it." 3 months later, the St. Catherine's Pediatric Oncology Ward was not only still open but had been completely renovated. New equipment, a music therapy program, comfortable sleeping accommodations for families, and a fund that ensured no child would be denied treatment because of their family's financial situation, the Whitmore Family Foundation, as Ezra had named it, though he was the only Whitmore involved, had become the hospital's largest benefactor. But Ezra had kept his word. He wanted nothing in return, no naming rights, no photo opportunities, no press conferences. The few hospital administrators who knew the source of the funding had been asked to keep it confidential. Mercy still danced with her patients. The difference now was that word had spread throughout the hospital, and other departments had begun requesting visits from the dancing nurse. The music therapy program had grown to include volunteers who came specifically to dance with patients who were able, and the hospital had even installed a small sound system in each room. Isaiah was in remission now, his hair growing back in soft curls that Miss Ruby couldn't stop touching. He'd become something of a celebrity in the ward, teaching new patients the dance moves Miss Mercy had shown him, helping scared children find their rhythm in the midst of their fear. "You know," he said to Mercy one afternoon as they swayed to "Three Little Birds" by Bob Marley, "I think dancing is like medicine, but for the parts of you that aren't sick in your body." "What parts are those?" she asked, charmed by his 8-year-old philosophy. "The parts that get scared and sad and forget that good things still happen," he said. "Dancing reminds those parts that they're okay too." Mercy had to step into the hallway to compose herself. In all her years of nursing, she'd never heard anyone describe the healing power of joy so perfectly. She found Ezra there, standing awkwardly by the elevators in his expensive suit, holding a small wrapped package. Over the past 3 months, he'd visited the ward occasionally, never intrusively, never demanding attention or recognition, just quietly checking on the progress of the renovations and sometimes sitting with families who needed someone to listen. The staff had grown comfortable with his presence, though most still didn't know exactly who he was or where the funding had come from. "Isaiah's doing well," he said, nodding toward the room where they could hear the boys' laughter mixing with the music. "He is. His doctors are amazed by his progress. Not just physically, his whole spirit is stronger." "And you? How are you doing?" It was a simple question, but Mercy realized that very few people asked her that anymore. Everyone assumed she was fine because she was always taking care of everyone else. The financial stress had eased significantly. The hospital had given all the pediatric staff substantial raises as part of their partnership with the foundation, but more than that, her work felt meaningful in a way it hadn't before. "I'm good," she said, and meant it. "Really good. Thank you for that." "You don't need to thank me. You reminded me of something important." He held out the package. "This is for you." Inside was a small, simple music box. When she opened it, a tiny figure of a nurse began to turn slowly as "What a Wonderful World" played in delicate, tinkling notes. "I know it's not much," he said, suddenly uncertain again. "But I wanted you to have something that I wanted you to know that what you do matters. Not just the medical care, but the dancing, the joy, the way you make people believe in goodness when they're in the darkest place they've ever been." Mercy felt tears threatening. "It's perfect. There's something else," he said. "I've been thinking about expanding this. Not just here, but other hospitals. Other children who need someone to dance with them, to remind them that life still has music in it even when they're fighting for it. Would you be interested in heading up that program?" What would that mean? It would mean traveling to hospitals around the country, training staff, setting up music therapy programs, making sure that every child who's sick has someone who will dance with them if they want to. He paused. It would also mean a salary that would let you live comfortably, benefits, and the resources to make real change in children's lives. Mercy was quiet for a long moment, watching Isaiah through the window as he showed a new patient, a little girl with a bald head covered by a bright purple scarf, how to move his arms to the music. "Why me?" she asked finally. "Because you dance with sick children, not because someone told you to, not because it's in your job description, not because there's a reward waiting for you at the end. You do it because you understand something that most people forget, that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken in someone's body. It's about reminding their spirit that there are still reasons to keep fighting." He looked toward Isaiah's room, where Miss Ruby was now standing, swaying gently to the music as she watched her grandson teach another child to find joy in the midst of fear. "That little boy in there told me that dancing is medicine for the parts of you that aren't sick in your body," Ezra continued. "I think he learned that from you. And I think there are children all over this country who need that kind of medicine." 6 months later, the Dancing Hearts Foundation had partnerships with 18 hospitals in 12 states. Mercy had trained over 200 healthcare workers in basic music and movement therapy techniques. More importantly, she'd helped create something that was spreading organically, a culture within pediatric care that prioritized not just physical healing but emotional and spiritual wellness. She still worked at St. Catherine's part of the time, still danced with Isaiah, who was now considered fully in remission and served as the ward's unofficial ambassador to new patients and their families. But she also traveled regularly, setting up programs, training staff, and most importantly, dancing with children who needed to remember that the world still had beauty in it. The foundation operated with complete transparency, publishing detailed reports about where every dollar went and what impact it was having. Ezra had insisted on this from the beginning, wanting to set a standard for how philanthropic organizations should operate. "You know," Mercy said to him one afternoon as they watched a group of children in wheelchairs learning to dance with their physical therapists, "I never properly asked you, what made you really decide to do this?" They were in the Children's Hospital in Denver, where the Dancing Hearts program had just launched. The sight of children moving to music, their faces bright with laughter despite their illnesses, had become familiar but never lost its power to move both of them. "Do you remember what you asked me that first day in the parking lot?" Ezra asked. "You asked what it was going to cost you. As if kindness always comes with a price tag. In my experience, it usually does." "I know. And that's what broke my heart. That your first instinct when someone offered to help was to assume there was a catch, because that had been your experience with people who had resources." He was quiet for a moment. "I grew up with money, Mercy. I've lived my entire adult life in a world where every interaction is a transaction, where kindness is a strategy, where helping someone is really about helping yourself. And watching you dance with Isaiah that day, I realized I'd forgotten that goodness exists without agenda. You weren't dancing with him because someone was paying you extra, or because you wanted recognition, or because it would advance your career. You were dancing with him because he was 8 years old and scared and needed to remember that life could still be joyful." A little girl in a hospital gown tugged on Mercy's scrubs. "Miss Mercy, can you teach me the spinning move?" "Of course, sweetheart." Mercy knelt down to the girl's level. "But we'll do a gentle spin, okay? One that won't make your forepull." As they began to move together, Ezra continued, "I realized that day that I'd spent so much time learning how to make money that I'd forgotten how to make a difference. Real difference. The kind that matters. And now I wake up every morning knowing that somewhere, a child who's fighting for their life is going to dance today. That somewhere, a grandmother like Miss Ruby is going to watch her grandchild laugh and remember that miracles still happen. That somewhere, a nurse is going to create a moment of joy in a place that desperately needs it." He watched Mercy guide the little girl through a series of gentle movements, their laughter mixing with the music that now filled the corridors of another hospital. "I spent the first 34 years of my life accumulating wealth," he said quietly. "These past few months, I've learned what it means to accumulate meaning." A year later, Isaiah Washington stood on the stage of the annual Dancing Hearts Foundation Gala, the organization's first and only fundraising event, held not to raise money for operations but to establish an endowment that would ensure the program's permanence. He was 9 now, his hair thick and curly, his eyes bright with the particular wisdom that comes from having looked death in the face and chosen to dance instead. Miss Ruby sat in the front row, wearing a dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she watched her grandson prepare to speak. "My name is Isaiah Washington," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom filled with healthcare workers, donors, and families whose children had been touched by the program. "When I was 8, I was really sick. Like, really, really sick. And I was scared all the time." The room was completely silent, hundreds of adults hanging on the words of a 9-year-old who'd learned truths they were still discovering. But then, Miss Mercy came and she asked me if I wanted to dance. And I thought, how can you dance when you're sick? How can you dance when you're scared? How can you dance when you don't know if you're going to get better? He paused, looking out at the audience with the complete confidence that comes from having something important to say. "And Miss Mercy taught me that you don't dance because everything's okay. You dance because you're still here. Because your heart's still beating and your body can still move and there's still music in the world even when everything else is scary." In the audience, Mercy felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Beside her, Ezra was completely still, his usual composure cracked open by the raw honesty of a child who'd turned suffering into wisdom. The doctors made my body better, Isaiah continued. But Miss Mercy and the dancing made my spirit better. And I think when you're really sick, you need both kinds of medicine. He looked directly at Mercy then, his smile bright enough to power the entire ballroom. Miss Mercy taught me that joy is a choice you can make even when things are really hard. And now kids in hospitals all over the country get to learn that too. So when they're scared or sad or don't know if they're going to be okay, they can remember that there's still music, and there's still dancing, and there's still reasons to keep going. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes. But more than the applause, more than the donations that would be pledged that night, more than the media coverage that would spread the story further, what mattered was the truth a 9-year-old boy had spoken. Joy is a choice you can make even when things are really hard. Later that evening, after the last donor had been thanked and the last photograph had been taken, Mercy found herself on the hotel's rooftop terrace with Ezra. The city stretched out below them, millions of lights marking millions of lives, each carrying their own mixture of struggle and hope. "Can I ask you something?" Mercy said. "Of course. Do you ever miss it? The world you left behind? The deals, the power, the rush of making millions of dollars in a single afternoon?" Ezra was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "You know what I miss? I miss the simplicity of it. When your only goal is making money, every decision is clear-cut. Will this make me richer or not? There's no moral complexity, no wondering if you're doing the right thing, no staying awake at night worried about whether you're making a real difference. And now I lose sleep wondering if we're reaching enough children, if the programs are making a lasting impact, if there's more we should be doing." He smiled. "But it's a different kind of worry. It's the kind that means something. And the money? I have more than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. What's the point of accumulating more when I could be using what I have to make sure that no child has to face the fight of their life without someone to remind them that there's still joy in the world?" They stood in comfortable silence for a while, two people who'd found their purpose in an unexpected place, watching over a city where, somewhere, children were sleeping in hospital beds, their dreams protected by the knowledge that tomorrow might bring music and movement, and the radical act of choosing joy in the face of fear. "Mercy? Yeah? Thank you. For what?" "For teaching me that the most valuable thing you can give someone isn't money or power or status. It's the reminder that they matter, that their joy matters, that their life is worth celebrating even when, especially when, they're fighting to keep it." In hospitals across the country, night shift nurses were making their rounds, checking on children who slept with small music boxes on their bedside tables, gifts from a foundation that understood that healing requires more than medicine. In pediatric wards from Seattle to Miami, staff members trained in the Dancing Hearts program were helping young patients find rhythm in the midst of chaos, movement in the face of stillness, hope in the darkest hours, and in a penthouse apartment overlooking the city, a former Wall Street shark went to sleep knowing that his greatest fortune wasn't in his bank account but in the countless children who would wake up tomorrow and choose to dance. Even though, especially because, they were still fighting for their lives, because sometimes the most revolutionary act is the simplest one, reminding someone that they are worthy of joy, that their life is worth celebrating, and that even in the sterile corridors of a hospital, there is still music worth dancing to. The dance that had begun in room 312 of St. Catherine's Hospital had become a movement, spreading from heart to heart, from child to child, from fear to hope. And at its center was a simple truth that a poor nurse and a rich CEO had discovered together: the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be shared, one dance at a time.